Welcome to the 53rd Manzanar Pilgrimage. My name is Bruce Embrey, and I am the co-chair of the Manzanar Committee. Our theme, 80 Years from Executive Order 9066 Lessons Learned, came about while we were discussing how fragile our democratic institutions seem to be. We kept returning to talking about how our community fought for our civil rights and redress over the past decades and how difficult that fight was. This year's pilgrimage is dedicated to two longtime friends and activists in the fight for civil rights. Jim Tu, longtime member of the Manzanar Committee and leader of the Manzanar at Dusk program, and Harry Williams, a member of the Bishop Paiute tribe and leading activist in the fight to defend Paihunadu and the Manzanar National Historic Site. We dedicate this 53rd pilgrimage to them because we want you to know their names and we want you to learn about their work to make our world a better place. We open with a special welcome from Kathy Jefferson Bancroft. Kathy, a good friend and colleague, is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer of the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone Reservation. Today's speakers all bring their insights to bear on the issues of today. We're especially honored to have Senator Hirono, one of the staunchest defenders of democracy in our country, sending greetings. We are also just so pleased to have such a wonderful warrior from our community speak to us today. Also joining us is California Attorney General Rob Bonta, another steadfast advocate for civil rights and democracy who's doing amazing work here in California. Very grateful he could join us again this year. Other leaders and longtime activists from our community, including Dale Minami, the lead counsel for Fred Korematsu's Coram Nobis case, and Burroughs from the Japanese American National Museum, longtime community activist Alan Nishio, and Karen Umemoto, the director of UCLA's Asian American Studies Center. All have distinguished themselves in many ways and will be sharing their thoughts on this 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. And our dear friends and colleagues from the Manzanar National Historic Site will share with us some important updates about their work. But we're more than just talk. Once again, Bonbu Stories, Kyodo Taiko, and Ken Koshio join us with amazing cultural performances. We have special song here at Manzanar, performed by Los Manzaneros. This song is one of solidarity and friendship from a group of multiracial activists who've been with us for the past 50 years. And while we'd rather been at Manzanar with you, we hope you enjoy today's program. Thank you.
Manahu Inaniane Kathy Jefferson Bancroft. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone Reservation. And I just want to welcome all of you to Paihunadu and to the 53rd Manzanar Pilgrimage. It's always an honor to come here, even if I'm not going there. It's just an honor to be able to listen to all of you, to be in touch with people that I've made such good friends with. These are interesting times, and I find it really interesting that it's been 80 years since this order was signed and put in place, because we're in times like that now where history can change. History can change in a minute, and we need to be paying attention and thinking of what's going on around us, but also applying what we've learned from the past, what we've learned from our, not only what's going on, the people around us, the people, events happening now, but our ancestors. And that's why I think this is so great to come together with both young and old to determine where our future is. And we know that by being more aware of the past and just how important it is. So I hope this is going to be wonderful as usual, and welcome, and it's great to see all of you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Patrick Taylor, Acting Superintendent of Manzanar National Historic Site, and on behalf of all the employees of the National Park Service, we wanted to welcome you to the 53rd Annual Manzanar pilgrimage. It's also the 30th anniversary of the National Historic Site, so we wanted to pause and thank all of you over the years and over the decades that have made us possible. Almost all National Park Service units have partners that are very important to them and how they operate and how they developed, but there's few that probably have a relationship as important as the Manzanar Committee is to Manzanar National Historic Site. We truly wouldn't be here without you and all the work that you've all done, so thank you very much, and we're always honored to play a role in the pilgrimage. I stand at probably the most iconic spot at Manzanar National Historic Site. This is where we would be having the event in person if we were all able to come. We certainly hope that next year and in the future we'll be able to meet here on a more regular in-person basis. But thank you again for joining this very important event. Like all of you, I'm very much looking forward to the speakers that are going to be presenting to us over the next couple of hours. I hope to learn. The theme of this year is Lessons Learned from Executive Order 9066, and those lessons are never more relevant than they are today. There are many groups, nations in fact, that are now struggling, and I hope that we can all pause and reflect not just on the history of the site, but what it means to us and what actions we can learn from that to carry forward to make the world a better place. Thank you again, and I look forward to meeting with many of you and talking with many of you into the future.
Aloha, I'm Senator Mazie Hirono. I'm happy to join you all today as we come together to mark the 53rd Annual Manzanar Pilgrimage and the 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. 80 years ago, long-standing racism and xenophobia led to one of the worst decisions made by a president in our nation's history. Executive Order 9066 led to the unjust and unconstitutional internment of Japanese in the U.S. This horrific treatment of Japanese people simply because of their ancestry is a stain on our country's history, one that we must never forget. Although we have come a long way since 1942, the last 2 years have shown us that we still have a long way to go when it comes to treating everyone in this country with dignity and respect. As the COVID-19 pandemic swept the world, we again saw the consequences of baseless fear and misinformation. Discrimination and racism have incited a disturbing rise in violence and hate crimes against Asians and communities across the country. I am grateful to the Manzanar Committee and all of you for making sure this pilgrimage continues even in these unprecedented times. I appreciate the opportunity to join you and thank you for all you do. Together, may we do everything in our power to ensure we never forget our history and prevent the mistreatment of not just AAPI communities, but all marginalized groups. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Rob Bonta, California Attorney General, and I'm honored to join you virtually today in reflection as we honor this annual Manzanar pilgrimage. As we mark 80 years since Executive Order 9066, there remain many lessons to be learned about this dark chapter in our nation's past. Thank you, Manzanar Committee, for educating and raising public awareness about the incarceration and violation of civil rights of Japanese Americans during World War II, and for your efforts to continue to raise awareness around the dangers that emerge when constitutional rights are violated today. 80 years ago, Executive Order 9066 forced the imprisonment of nearly 120,000 Japanese Americans. It was unjust, it was unconstitutional, and it cannot be forgotten. Because when we shy away from our past, we are doomed to repeat it. As some try to ban books and rewrite history in our nation, here in California, we move forward by recognizing and affirming the valuable lessons embedded in our history. We don't shy away from the hard truths, we learn from them. The unjust incarceration of Japanese Americans represents one of the most shameful chapters in American history, and it must be recognized as such. Despite never being charged with a crime, despite being denied due process under the law, Japanese Americans were forcibly removed from their homes, schools, and businesses. They were incarcerated for one thing and one thing only, their heritage. This serves as a grim but critical reminder that there are appalling consequences that emerge when racism, hate, fear, and xenophobia are allowed to fester, when they are left unchecked. This lesson is especially important right now. Japanese Americans and all our diverse AAPI communities have felt so much pain over the last 2 years. In California, anti-Asian hate crimes increased by 107% in 2020. We have seen our elders assaulted. We have seen our loved ones gunned down. We have seen mothers and fathers, daughters and sons murdered and killed. This wave of hate and violence targeting us must come to an end. Our communities deserve safety. At the California Department of Justice, we're committed to doing our part. That's why I launched the Racial Justice Bureau, established our Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement, issued new guidance and resources to help combat hate crimes, and why we continue to engage statewide in efforts to vigorously defend and enforce our federal and state civil rights laws through DOJ's Civil Rights Enforcement Section. Today, we continue to learn from this dark chapter as we chart a brighter future for our diverse communities. We refuse to leave the door open to what happened 80 years ago, the systemic violation of constitutional rights fueled by racism, xenophobia, and hate. For Japanese Americans, for all Americans. As your Attorney General, I pledge to not rest when it comes to protecting our civil rights and the safety, health, and well-being of our families. I proudly join you in this fight. Thank you, Manzanar Committee, for your leadership in this space and for hosting this 53rd annual virtual pilgrimage. I'm honored to join you.
On this 80th anniversary of the issuance of Executive Order 9066, there are very many important lessons to be learned, lessons to be remembered. One is about the frailty of our civil rights denied to Japanese Americans during World War II. Civil rights are not gifts. They are challenges to us because we must continue to struggle, to fight, to uphold the words of the Constitution because the justice enshrined in those words are not self-executing. There are lessons about the fragility of our institutions because all three branches of government failed us during World War II. The president issued the order, Congress upheld it in a series of laws, and the Supreme Court validated these president's order, even though it was based on what we now know was a record of fraud, of misrepresentation, of outright lies, as admitted to by the government itself when we were able to get Fred Korematsu, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Min Yasui's convictions overturned. There are lessons about dissent, because these three men stood up along with Mitsue Endo and challenged the government orders and the confinement. And in those days, these three men were considered pariahs. They were outcasts. And today they are heroes because dissent can sometimes be the highest form of patriotism. It is not the enemy of patriotism. So it's up to us to speak up when we see something wrong and we disagree with the policy. And it's also important to remember history because some people know history, but they will choose to ignore it out of political expediency. We must try to marry history with activity so that we don't just talk, we actually do something about it. And to keep active, to keep the struggle alive is what we need to do to make sure this never happens again to any other group. Thank you.
The start was forged in the fire of power and control, heavy to sift through. As the ash thickened to sludge, I can feel the toxic tendencies coat every inch of my membrane. I hear crying voices. I yell, "Please stop crying. Let's leave together." Silent, as they are completely encased. Chrysalli hanging, moving, but scared to leave their familiar armor. I've become numb to who I was, but now The strength that was once pulled and bound to the particulars of others is now growing, brightening. I am changing as I listen to my wants, fears, and soul. I'm starting to feel the breeze. It's cool, refreshing, unplanned. It feels Genki.
I remember complaining as a kid that I didn't want to be the quiet, polite, and ladylike girl my mom wanted me to be. I proudly expressed my desire to go off the beaten path and be me, despite what everyone else was doing. This, to my mom, wasn't very Japanese. I laugh too loud and she gives me the look. I get upset by something that hurt me and that makes me too sensitive. Don't let it bother you. I talk or dress too boyishly. That's not how girls should act. I love being Japanese American. However, I had a difficult time accepting the way my family wanted me to be Japanese. And I've learned that my way of thinking comes from a place of privilege. My privilege is that maybe I have more choice in how to act versus not to act. My survival and acceptance into the world doesn't depend on me blending in, dropping my culture, or assimilating to any specific group. At least not to the degree that it mattered for my ancestors. Being able to focus on more than just my survival, I acknowledge the freedoms given to me to choose how I want to be.
When I am consumed by grief, or too exhausted to speak, or troubled by anything at all, I fall into the warmth of a friend's arms, collapse into the weight of a lover. I nestle in further to their comfort, get closer to their heart, relax into their grasp. I think of how my ancestors must have done the same in the face of perpetual upheaval, of such monumental loss. And finally, I come to see surrender in a different light, not just as a tragedy of powerlessness. For what is surrender if not an ask for tenderness, for mercy? A trusting, a hoping that you will be treated kindly by hands other than your own.
Between barbed wire, watchtowers, and armed soldiers with guns pointing at them, my family planted seeds in the unfamiliar Arizona soil, just as they had done on their Central Valley farms. Shigata ganai, it can't be helped when there is no rain. If the crops won't grow, our beautiful earth is working as hard as she can, and so are we. Some might say that they were too submissive, that they should have done more to fight injustice. But maybe the gardens they tended to and the community that grew was resistance. Shigata ganai, some things can't be helped, but others can. Culture is preserved with each jar of tsukemono, community comes together with each mochitsuki. Our existence is resistance. And as our roots grow deeper, and our branches reach away from the soil, we remember, Shigata ganai, this little seed cannot be controlled, but it's trying its best. And so are we.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charlene Tonai Din, and I'm a second-year student at UCLA and a part of the 2022 Manzanar Desk Planning Committee. Today, I'd like to share with you a short story. So, the day Pearl Harbor was bombed, my great-grandfather, Kyodo Tonai, was arrested by the FBI, thrown into various Department of Justice camps across the nation, and eventually placed behind barbed wire with the rest of his family in Amachi concentration camp in Colorado. I learned from Minoru Tonai, my great-uncle, that Gengoro, his father, returned to his family with his spirit noticeably diminished. and I can only suspect that being forcibly removed, interrogated, and imprisoned was traumatizing to the point that my great-grandfather returned a broken version of the man he was before the war. The story of Gengoro and other Japanese Americans is hauntingly similar to the experiences of many Latinx migrants, Southeast Asian refugees, and countless others who have been detained and deported. Hearing about the thousands who are separated from their families, displaced from their homes, and thrown behind barbed wire forces me to think of the trauma and shame that our community experienced when we were uprooted by a country we thought of as home. However, unlike many of these migrants and refugees, as well as the Issei generation, today's Japanese American community has the resources and connections to create political and social change. We can be the allies our brave and resilient Oba-chans and Oji-chans desperately needed during World War II. If we do not teach and discuss this injustice that has occurred in our own communities, our country is bound to repeat it and has proven so. One of the main questions is, how do we even continue to fight for justice in a world that shares so many parallels to 80 years ago when the US government issued Executive Order 9066? I know that especially for a lot of young people like Gen Z, this may not seem like an issue we have much control over or know how to address. And after living through countless historical events, including a global pandemic, and being subject to information overload before we've even reached our 20s, I understand how social justice may be low on our priorities list as we're just beginning to navigate who we are and how to gain a footing in adulthood. However, such work can help us find the emotional, communal, and self-fulfillment we're looking for. If I've learned anything from this history, it's that racist, xenophobic beliefs are not new, but neither is the love that fuels its resistance. The fight for justice is a long, emotionally demanding marathon that requires constant healing, rejuvenation, and lots of empathy. Because how can we create a more compassionate and just society if we do not foster those same qualities within ourselves and our community? By intentionally embodying the virtues we want to see, we are already forming the world we wish to live in. We can then carry those qualities into our personal and professional lives to discuss issues we care about. Even if you don't identify as an activist, there are ways to use your talents and interests to be more justice-oriented. Art, singing, dancing, coding, science, teaching, and more are all necessary to advance us towards an equitable future. If more of us collectively and passionately address social causes, especially through mediums we enjoy, it will be easier to spread awareness and create change in this world. If you don't know what causes you're particularly passionate about, give yourself time to explore and be aware of your gut reactions to those issues. One lovely thing about the internet is that we can watch, listen, and learn anything from anywhere. What stories make you cry, frustrated, or hopeful? These are the topics you will find the most rewarding to help solve, and also the ones you can contribute the most to. Additionally, I'd also encourage you to spend some energy and time to learn from and volunteer for many of the well-established organizations that continue to guide conversations and drive movements on issues you care about. As you have probably guessed, the organizations featured in this program are a great place to start. The people in these groups have boundless wisdom, and their lived experiences are lessons that we all can learn from. Remember that we're always standing on the shoulders of these giants and their accomplishments. So as I close, I would like to remind you all that if we are to fight for a world that is different from what our ancestors faced, we have to collectively recognize the healing power of addressing hatred with compassion in the name of justice. May you all be happy, healthy, well, and safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlene. If you ever feel discouraged about what's going on in our country today, just take a look at what young people are doing. You will feel much better, I guarantee it. As I mentioned in our introduction, our theme, 80 Years from Executive Order 9066, Lessons Learned, came about because we felt it was important to look back at our history to see what would help us in the fight against these unprecedented attacks on our democracy today. One of the lessons the Manzanar Committee would like to talk about is how shaping the collective memory of our community, particularly over the last 50 years, helped us in our fight for civil rights. In many ways, the 1969 pilgrimage to Manzanar was a pivotal moment in our community's fight for civil rights and redress. After the pilgrimage, my mother and the other founders of the Manzanar Committee knew it was time to confront the injustices of EO 9066. Our community had, by and large, remained silent. Most survivors of the unjust incarceration were unwilling or unable to talk about what happened. Little had been written, practically nothing by the actual victims, and in-depth analytical studies were lacking. They knew that talking about what happened in camp was the first and actually the most important step to be taken. They also knew it wasn't going to be easy. Before they even began, people said, why bring up the past? Why revive painful memories or argue over things that happened so long ago? But confronting those painful memories was essential to healing the scars of camp and to empowering our community. Unearthing long-buried, painful memories wasn't easy. What my mother called the most traumatic experience of her life definitely left scars. It was an act of resistance, and it took courage to push forward. So they relied on talking story, telling stories of what life behind barbed wire was like and about how they persevered after camp. As these stories came to light, serious questions arose. What were these places? Relocation centers or concentration camps? Were they evacuated or removed? They grappled with questions of loyalty, the myth of the model minority, of shame, and of righteous anger. The most contentious arguments were over what language and descriptions to use. Buoyed by newly created ethnic studies and Asian American studies programs, and by initiatives like the Japanese American Oral History Project, led by Dr. Art Hansen, a more comprehensive understanding about the forced removal emerged. As more and more stories came to light, it was painfully obvious the forced removal and unjust incarceration was not the result of individual bias or a simple mistake by our government. As our community came to terms with the truth about EO 9066, it began to force those in power to recognize its unjust character as well. The earliest example of this was the committee's campaign to get Manzanar recognized as a state historic landmark. The bronze plaque that is set in stone outside of the Manzanar National Historic Site is actually one of the first victories of the redress movement. Written by those who had lived behind barbed wire, the words were strong and direct. Racism, economic exploitation, and concentration camp were all used. Furthermore, and as importantly, we learned that by lobbying, organizing, and by uniting our community, we could get our government to redress the injustice of camp. We learned the words we use to name places and experiences shape how we see, understand, and relate to our history. We've come to understand that words can impose values and judgments on sites like Manzanar. We learned words and racist monuments can be symbols of erasure and subjugation, and that euphemisms had to be replaced so that sites of injustice like Manzanar can be reclaimed as life-affirming sites, sites that symbolize resilience. These important lessons are not unique to our story. They apply to the totality of American history. What our community went through drives us to fight against all efforts to ban books or to ban teachers from exploring the truth about our history. The laws passed banning the teaching of the 1619 Project and the supposed teaching of critical race theory are nothing more than attempts to stop a national reckoning with our racist and colonial past. They are nothing more than an attempt to protect the system of white supremacy, and they must be challenged. We have to support all efforts to undo the colonial and racist thinking in America's psyche. This means supporting campaigns to topple Confederate and colonial monuments, to decolonize museums, and to overhaul school curricula. We have a stake in supporting efforts to decolonize place names on federal lands by removing racist names and symbols from our national parks and sites. It's important we recognize these as indigenous lands and begin to talk openly about the stewardship and the control of these places. Furthermore, our experience as an immigrant community leads us to be outraged at the abuses of immigrants and refugees by our government. And as Charlene, our student speaker, spoke about her family story, the parallels with how immigrants are treated today and how our families were treated were painfully clear. Families torn apart, whether in 1942 or in 2022, simply because they are considered to be the other, is wrong. The moment demands that we redouble our efforts to shape the narrative of our country by telling our story. We must remind America that our story is one small example of what can happen when any group is demonized, scapegoated, or seen as the other. We must rise to the challenges facing our democracy with the same spirit and determination we had during our fight for redress. This is what we must do if we truly wish to honor all those who endured the injustices of Executive Order 9066. Thank you.
Thank you to the Manzanar Committee for allowing me to be a part of this virtual commemoration. The Manzanar Committee has worked tirelessly for the past 53 years to ensure that new generations are exposed to the reality of the camp and that the lessons are learned. I was born in Manzanar. While my recollections of camp are few, I am part of a dwindling number for whom the camps was a part of our direct experience. In the future, this experience and story must be told by others. During the 1980s, I was involved in the fight for redress and reparations, where we were able to successfully get the U.S. government to admit that the camps were wrong and to provide reparations to those survivors during World War II. This was an important chapter in our history and is one that reaffirmed for me the importance of a community grassroots movement in creating social change. This is especially important today as we look in an environment of disinformation, conspiracy theories, and historic amnesia, where many deny that the camps even occurred, or if they did, they were for the protection of Japanese Americans. We must combat this and ensure that the lessons are indeed learned. So we rely upon you, a new generation, to keep the story alive, to recommit yourself that Manzanar and the other camps are more than just a history lesson, but a cautionary tale of what can occur when we allow one group to be scapegoated and their rights taken away under the guise of national security. Thank you for being part of the virtual commemoration and for recommitting yourself to keep the story alive. Thank you.
I associate Manzanar with my father, Hank Umemoto, who was there along with 11,000 others who were wrongly incarcerated during World War II, many for over 3 years. And as I think about what led up to the signing of Executive Order 9066, I think about the firestorm of hate against Asian Americans and other targeted groups today. If we don't educate the public not only about the camps, but about who we are as Asian Americans in all of our diversity and humanity, then these atrocious acts will continue. This can be a breakthrough moment, especially with all the concern about anti-Asian hate. As an educator, I see the need to educate every single person in America about our collective histories and generate that kind of historical empathy and compassion that is the best antidote to the kinds of prejudice and hate we see today. I really want to express my congratulations and kudos to the Manzanar Committee for your consistent and important role in educating our fellow citizens and residents.
Los Manzaneros is a group of multiracial educators, political activists, artists, and camp chefs whose lives have been connected by over 40 years of camaraderie and political activism. The mistreatment of Japanese Americans was similar to the violations of the civil rights of other peoples of color in the U.S. The enslavement of African people, deportations of Mexican American citizens, the genocide and displacement of indigenous peoples and Pacific Islanders. The Manzanar pilgrimage has been a reminder of how the circles of time and change bind us together as we struggle and fight in this American arena of racism and selected privilege.
In the history of this country, there's a story we must tell of Japanese American people, U.S. citizens as well. They lost their homes and businesses and packed the things they owned. Some were sent to Manzanar. Now Manzanar is home. 10,000 people lived and died here in Manzanar. Underneath a hot and blazing sun, they burned and scarred. Despite these harsh conditions, imprisoned behind barbed wire, they always kept their dignity and hearts full of fire. Manzanar, we come to pay our respect. Manzanar, we won't forget our people's rights and freedoms were taken away in this land of the free.
Now a loyalty oath was requested. It confused the people so. Because if you could not say yes to that request, my friend, well, to Tule Lake you'd go. Yet many volunteered to serve, and they formed at 442, and they fought and died for those inalienable rights that we all hold as true.
Manzanar, we come to pay our respect. Manzanar, we won't forget our people's rights and freedoms were taken away in this land of the free. Let's not forget the hardships and injustice that occurred. The people's will to survive and the courage to endure. The road was rough and weary, but they came from near and far on a pilgrimage in 1969. They marched to Manzanar. Manzanar, we come to pay our respects. Manzanar, we won't forget our people's rights and freedoms were taken away in this land of the free. In this land of the free. In this land of the free.
Greetings from all of us at JANM. I'm standing in the midst of our new exhibition, Sutra Bible, which tells the story of how profoundly important faith was during the camp experience, the Buddhist faith and the Christian faith. And each year at Manzanar, that's a tradition, that interfaith tradition is a way of keeping that very deep connection to faith and community and to belonging. It's a very important way of keeping that alive. For me, coming to Manzanar, my first experience at Manzanar was the year that I spoke, and it was profoundly important for me in so many ways. It was profound because it was a tangible, real symbol of what happens when there is grave injustice, when public policy is based on failed political leadership. But also, more importantly, it was this extraordinarily tangible symbol and this gathering point of this multi-generational community with deep connections to Manzanar, with deep connections to the community, who were not just keeping the story of Manzanar alive, but they were doing it so that what happened to Japanese Americans would never happen to anybody else. And what was also so inspiring and so compelling for me being there was seeing how deeply embedded that story is in the community. And it's not just the survivors, and it's not just the survivor families, but it was also in the young activists, the students who came to Manzanar, who were taking up the cudgels, these cudgels of resistance. And their aspirations were founded and based in this extraordinarily deep sense of shared values and culture, and that was being carried forward. And it reminded me so powerfully of my own experience as a young activist, when we took up that struggle against one of the most unjust systems of apartheid in the entire world, and we won. And it was so extraordinary for me to have seen that same energy, that same commitment to change, that same dedication to change, and to see how that thread was run through the generations. And I felt such extraordinary hope. And I hope that we can all be together next year. And congratulations also on your 53rd pilgrimage. 53 years of this annual commitment is really quite extraordinary. It was your leadership that led the way, and it's your leadership that has allowed all of us to continue to use that history, those lessons of history, to shine a light on the present and to help guide us towards a more just future.
Over the last 2 years, a lot of the operations have changed at Manzanar National Historic Site, as you can imagine. But we're very excited that we continue to work towards a full reopening of the site. The buildings you can see behind me have been open throughout the duration of COVID, but the visitor center has opened more and more, and we continue in the next couple of months to reopen the site so that visitors can come and appreciate the site, learn a little bit more about the history of the site, and we certainly hope that all of you will be able to make a trip out this summer as well. As many of you know, one of the defining characteristics of Manzanar was the children's village. Here at the orphanage, we're continuing to work excavating some of the features of the site. We look forward to progress in the future, including restoring fences, some waysides, as we work with more and more of the survivors and they provide their oral histories. This is one of the best spots for us to interact with the public and truly talk about how the camps impacted not just adults, but children and entire families as well. Another project we're excited to continue this year is the restoration of the historic orchards around Manzanar. This project's been ongoing for about 16 years. This year and into next year, we're hoping to plant about 50 more fruit trees. The historic orchards are a great opportunity for the National Park Service to work with both the incarcerees, their descendants, and the local community, because these orchard trees in many cases date back to prior to World War II. It's a great opportunity for volunteers to come out and assist in a meaningful way. The food actually goes back to visitors to the park and sometimes the local community as well. The Community Archaeology Program is another operation we've recently resumed at Manzanar National Historic Site. Just over the past week, we had about 200 person-hours worth of volunteer service that came out and worked at the hospital site, uncovering features like the historic bench you can see behind me and rebuilding historic walls. I stand here on the corner of the WRA administrative area, and one of the projects we're most excited for is to bring back one of the administrative residences that will be returned to the site hopefully later this year. We're doing this in partnership with the Eastern Sierra Interpretive Association. These buildings are really important because they tell some of the complex history of Manzanar. It was a lot of the Japanese and Japanese Americans that constructed these housing areas, even for the administrative uses. After the war, the buildings went out to the local community and served another life. So we're very excited to bring some of those back into the sites that you can see behind me and start telling some more of the complicated and nuanced history associated with Manzanar.
Sing with us, say.
Hello, everybody. We've dedicated this year's pilgrimage to two individuals. One, Harry Williams, a local of Paiuhunadu, also known as the Owens Valley, a member of the Bishop Paiu tribe who passed away last year. And also Jim Tu, who some of you knew. He passed away in late May of last year, about a month before last year's pilgrimage. What made Jim special was his kind heart and his really fierce dedication to youth, as exemplified by his work on our Manzanar Dusk program for a few years. But what a lot of people don't know about his dedication was really just how fierce it is. And one example was very early on when he first came to the Manzanar committee. He made a crazy, dangerous journey to his first pilgrimage back in the early 2000s. He drove all the way from a conference in Oakland, California at night, down I-5, all the way south past Bakersfield. He cut across the Sierras there, and then drove north back to Lone Pine, through mountain roads, through heavy rain, a lot of two-lane highway. It really wasn't worth the risk, but he did it anyway because he wanted to be able to contribute to something. He figured that the inspiration of his first pilgrimage would take him on another journey. Well, that journey ended up being joining the Manzanar committee, and I'll be talking more about his contributions to the committee and to the youth we work with now at our Manzanar Dusk program, which if you're watching this during our premiere on Saturday, April 30th, that begins at 5 o'clock p.m. live on Zoom. We hope you'll join us. Thank you.
Manahu, Ananiane, Noah Williams. Hello, my name is Noah Williams. I am the son of the late Harry Williams, and I would just like to first start off by thanking the Manzanar Committee for this year's dedication to the Manzanar 2022 pilgrimage to my father, Harry Williams. For those who didn't get a chance to meet my father, he was a fierce environmental activist who loved and cared for this land and his people. Any chance he would get, he would be very well known to show up to public meetings, whether it be, our own Inyo County Board of Supervisors or standing committee for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. He would be there to represent, our people and be a voice, in our community to, protect and save the water that's, being taken from the Owens Valley and being sent down to Los Angeles. As I said before, he has had, a key role in the rediscovery of our traditional practice of spreading water through ancient irrigation systems. He had spent countless hours retracing our ancestors' footsteps, and getting a better understanding of, their way of living and their life and their use of water, because, he understood that water is life, and without water, there is no life. So, for those who didn't know my father, he was very well known to be, outspoken and be a voice for his people. But, alongside his environmental work, he was also crucially involved in repatriation efforts to reclaim some of our ancestors from various archives and museums throughout the United States, as well as, serving on countless boards and committees such as the Owens Valley Committee, the California Environmental Protection Agency Tribal Advisory Committee. He had spent over 20 years locally serving as a board member of the Bishop Paiute Tribal Scholarship Committee, where he had sent, countless indigenous students locally here in the Owens Valley, to pursue their higher education. He's dearly missed, and, I surely do miss him, but it, does make me feel proud to be his son, just see, the level of impact that he has had, on, people all throughout his life. And, I would just like to, again, thank everyone for honoring my dad in a good way. Manahob.
I am honored to carry this banner for my ancestors and many Japanese Americans. I am Japanese American.
My name is Chieko Kamisato. I carry the banner for Crystal City internment camp in honor of my fellow Japanese Peruvians.
I'm Carrie Furuya Morita, and I'm carrying the Gila River banner in honor of my Issei grandparents and my mother, who were forced to leave their small farming community of Parlir near Fresno, California during World War II. It is important for me and all generations to never forget any of the camps. However, Gila River is especially significant to me because it is where my grandparents and my mother lost their freedom for 3 years.
I am honored to carry the banner for the 100th Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and Military Intelligence Service. Although originally forbidden to join the U.S. military because they were considered the enemy aliens, when the going got rough and we needed soldiers, they were put into a segregated unit which went on to fight, die, and kill for their country while their families languished behind barbed wire and concentration camps. They became the most decorated unit in the history of the United States. So for this reason, I am proud to carry their colors. Theirs is the color of honor. Okaje Samare.
Hi, my name is David Fujioka. It is my honor to be carrying the virtual banner for Heart Mountain incarcerees and their descendants. My uncle, Ted Fujioka, joined the 442 so that his family and future generations could live in a better America. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tomoko Shino Price. I present the Jerome flag to honor my grandmother, my grandfather, and my father. They were all incarcerated in Manzanar and then transferred to Jerome to join the rest of the Shino family.
My name is Pat Sakamoto. I carry the banner for Manzanar to honor my mother, Ku Sakamoto, and all those who were unjustly incarcerated during World War II, and to remind us of the importance of raising our voices so no one will have to endure what my mother and our community went through.
Hi, I'm Lyndon Nishinaga. Born there in 1944, I proudly carry the banner for Camp Minidoka, Idaho, to honor the thousands of people incarcerated there, most of whom came from the U.S. Pacific Northwest. They include my late father, the Buddhist Reverend Gikan Nishinaga, my late mother, Masa Nishinaga, the late Kasumi Fujita, and so many other Japanese Americans. Their legacies of faith, compassion, struggle, and perseverance, Alagasho Eide To, shall live forever.
Hello, I'm Marlene Shigakawa, president of the Poston Community Alliance. My parents and grandparents were incarcerated in Poston, and my brother and I were born there. For me, Poston is a place of sacred land because of its special connection between the Japanese American and Native American communities. Mojave Indians began to arrive in Poston in 1865. Japanese Americans arrived in May 1942, and it was the beginning of a joint struggle to build a life-in camp. Japanese Americans toiled in the hot desert sun and generated green fields of agriculture and also built adobe school buildings, all of which were left behind for use by the Native American community. Today, gratitude flows from both communities as we honor the spirits of our ancestors and all those who came before us.
My name is Ruth Tamaki Miyano Beatles, and it's an honor to recognize and thank all those 7,000 Japanese Americans who were imprisoned at Rohr, Arkansas during World War II for 3.5 years. My parents, the Reverends Kichi and Yukiko Miyano, were Tendikyo missionaries in Los Angeles, and all 5 children, Yukihiro, Sakai, Tamaki, Seitaro, and Masao, were imprisoned at Rohr Camp for 3.5 years. Also, I'd like to honor Rose Ochi and George Takei, who also were imprisoned at Rohr and who in later years contributed so much to the Nisei community. Thank you.
It's a privilege and honor to be here. I am carrying the virtual banner of Topaz in commemoration of everyone who is incarcerated unjustly by our government. I would like to particularly recognize my parents, Dr. James Goto and Dr. Masako Kusayanagi Miura, who were in Topaz until it closed.
Hi, my name is Jason Fuji, and the reason why I carry the banner for Tule Lake is for my grandmother and her family. I want to represent my family along with all the other people that were incarcerated at the camps. I want to be able to carry on their history and their stories so that the future generations can learn and remember what happened to the Japanese Americans during World War II. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sigrid Banshoff Toy, and I'm so honored and proud to represent Tuna Canyon Detention Station, just a few short miles from the Los Angeles Civic Center. Imprisoned at Tuna Canyon were individuals of Japanese, German, and Italian descent and Japanese taken from their homes in Peru. On the night of December 7th, just after the attacks on Pearl Harbor, my father, Dr. Eugene Banshoff, was taken from his home by the FBI, leaving my mother with a small child and no resources in a hostile community. 3 presidential proclamations issued immediately after the attacks targeted high-profile community leaders, teachers, and business people, of which my father was one. I'm so proud to join my voice with so many others because we, who are the children of war, remember. Thank you.
Although we are not able to join together in person at Manzanar again this year, we have this opportunity to remember, to look back into our past, and to reflect on the experiences that those who were incarcerated at Manzanar and all the camps during World War II had. This is a significant year, as you know, since it is the 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066 and the opening of Manzanar back in the early summer of 1942. Recently, the exhibit entitled Sutra and Bible opened at the Japanese American National Museum, which examined how Christianity and Buddhism were an integral part of camp life. Also, I found a short article written by Reverend Ryuta Furumoto of Senshin Buddhist Temple on his experience of visiting the site for the first time. One of the things that was introduced in the exhibition and in Reverend Furumoto's article was how Manzanar was written in Japanese. These Issei leaders most likely came up with the 3 kanji characters for Manzanar. The character for man, or man, that was chosen was the kanji for many, or to be filled to the brim. The kanji chosen for za, the second character, means sand, and by itself is pronounced suna. The last character, na, according to Reverend Furumoto, means a beautiful place. So he said we can translate the Japanese version of Manzanar to mean a beautiful place filled with sand. Those of us who have been there can appreciate how the Isseis came up with the Japanese rendering of Manzanar, a beautiful place filled with sand. He said, though, that another meaning for na is how come. So the name in kanji can also be interpreted as, how come we were sent to such a strange place with so much sand? I was also reminded of a song that we sing at many of our Sunday memorial services called Seiya, or in English, Starry Night. The translation of the lyrics goes like this: more than all the countless sands Ganges River holds are the infinite Buddhas who fill this universe, ever watchful over us throughout day and night. Hearing this, my lonely heart fills with lasting peace. In our Buddhist tradition, the memorial date of our ancestors is very important. We regard those among our family and friends who passed away before us as our personal Buddhas. Here, the definition refers to Buddhas as teachers. We have memorial services often to remember them, and such occasions are opportunities to reflect on their wishes and expectations they have for us. All of those who are incarcerated in Manzanar and in the other camps, and those like my father-in-law Lawson Sakai, who joined the military to prove that they and their parents are loyal Americans, all of them serve as our guides, directing us to the right paths in life for each one of us. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. My thanks in particular to Reverend Dr. Duncan Williams and the JANM staff for putting together the wonderful exhibit Sutra and Bible running through November of this year, and also to Reverend Furumoto for his thought-provoking article. Our appreciation to the enlightened ones, to the teachings, and to the communities that support and sustain us. Namu Kie Butsu, Namu Kie Ho, Namu Kie So. Thank you.
Manzanar Pilgrimage Prayer. God above us, God within us, God all around us.
We come once again to the majestic snow-capped Sierra Nevada mountain range.
The mountains are witness to the hopes and fears of thousands of lives beaten, battered, and destroyed here.
We remember President Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066.
Government documents admit it was race prejudice, war hysteria, and failure of political leadership.
O Lord God, we remember the forced evacuation, lifetime investments in properties lost, farmland and businesses sold unfairly for pennies on the dollar.
O Lord God, money in Japanese bank accounts confiscated, high school graduation interrupted, university diplomas awarded some 60 years late.
Ideals of democracy broken, the U.S. Constitution ignored, and citizens' rights betrayed.
Although 62% were citizens, we were called enemy aliens. While everybody called us enemy aliens, the Quakers called us friends.
Hooray for the brave Quakers.
Governor Ralph Carr of Colorado advocated for Japanese Americans and fought against the internment.
Hooray for Governor Ralph Carr.
O Lord God, we were called model minority because we absorbed all the injustices, all the insults without fighting back.
We had become a doormat people, licking the boots of our oppressors.
We were docile not because we're Japanese, not because we're Buddhists, not because we're Shintoists or Confucianists.
We were docile because we were immigrants.
The bottom line for all immigrants is the same in all countries.
Absorb the insults and humiliation.
Absorb the military drafting of our sons right out of the concentration camps.
The bottom line for all immigrants is suck it up or go home.
But immigrants are not vulnerable forever.
The second and third generation fight back.
We honor Gordon Hirabayashi, Fred Korematsu, Minori Yasui, Frank Emi, and other brave souls.
In 1942, Gordon Hirabayashi was sentenced to hard labor.
In April 27, 2012, President Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
In California, January 30th annually is the Fred Korematsu Day, signed into law in September 2010.
The ground has shifted for immigrant rights.
Already in California, the minorities joining together have become the new majority.
The future belongs to those
who court the Afro-American and Latino voters.
O Lord God, America is no longer exclusively a Judeo-Christian society.
We are now also Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, Taoist, Sikh, Jain, Tingri Church, Konko Church, and non-religious.
Let us pay heed to the Hebrew Scriptures.
Be kind to the strangers in the land, because your fathers were strangers in Egypt.
Your fathers were strangers in Canaan.
And we would add, your fathers were strangers in America.
O Lord God, we rejoice in this new America.
No more Manzanar, no more Pearl Harbor, no more 9/11.
No more Hiroshima, no more Nagasaki.
No more Bataan Death March, no more Agent Orange.
No more My Lai village massacres.
Slowly, slowly, inch by inch, let us turn enemies into friends.
No more shock and awe invasions.
No more preemptive strikes where there are no weapons of mass destruction.
Slowly, slowly, inch by inch, by the mercy of God and our last hope for survival, let us turn our enemies into friends.
Abraham Lincoln did not say, God bless America.
Abraham Lincoln said, may America become a nation that God can bless.
O Lord God, the old world of our anger, bitterness, and revenge has passed away.
Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Israelis, Palestinians, Iranians, Tibetans, Chinese, Taiwanese,
Koreans, Japanese, Chechens, Uyghur, Rohingya, Buddhists, Shintoists,
Taoists, Hindus, Afro-Americans, Southeast Asians, Pacific Islanders, Latin Americans.
Make us one nation united in loyalty, compassion, and conscience.
Yet rich in our diversity of faiths and cultures.
Red, brown, yellow, black, and white.
We are precious in your sight.
Bless us, O Lord. Bless us, O Lord. Bless us, O Lord.
We pray in the name of the God of many names, the God of many faces, and the God of many prophets. Amen.